Welcome, my dear viewers, to this channel again. I am Pastor Alfred Fuka Tafibam, and I'm going to sort of be beginning another series today. I have so many series that are going on, and this one that I'm starting today will be under the title Why Uniting Church and State is Accursed or Damned or Anathema. Why uniting church and state is anathema. Now, what I intend to do, I intend to read quite a lot, or most of what I'm going to present it from this my book, Judgment, The Last Trump, and the Fall of America. And the reason I want to read my book is so that you understand that the principles that I'm sharing have not just developed today because we have Trump in the White House having been put there by 80% white evangelicals. What is going on is almost the end of a story that began a long time ago with the devil or politicians meddling with the Bible or with the religion that Jesus founded, if I may use the word religion. Now, the movement that Jesus founded was just called the Way, which is the way of life. Not the religion per se, because a religion is something you do, something you practice, but the way of life is how you live your life. So that was the movement of Jesus, probably from his statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but through me. Even in the book of Acts, we see that the movement that Jesus founded was not called Christianity. Pay attention to that. It was not called Christianity until 3 centuries later. It was just called the Way or the sect of the Nazarene. And it became a political expediency in the 3rd century by a Roman emperor to incorporate Christianity as the religion of the state. Because for the first 3 centuries of the movement, the Roman Empire, the state, the government, persecuted Christians or believers, disciples, followers of the way. They were persecuted desperately, many of them killed and slaughtered. But they did not give up their faith. And it's like saying that the devil said, if you can't beat them from outside, try and beat them from within. And since the 3rd century AD, the devil has greatly been succeeding in using political power to deceive those who are supposed to be following Jesus to do his bidding. And now we have reached the epitome of that in the presidency of Trump. So before I will read from this book, I'm going to take a little bit of time to give you the background as why did I write this book. I wrote this book 20 years ago. In fact, I sat down on my desk and wrote down the outline in 2003. And many things had been going through at the back of my mind before I decided and say, okay, I'll put this down in a book. I'll put down my ideas in a book. Incidentally, when God called me, when the Father called me in 1992, he gave me an assignment that I was going to write a book. And I said, when? He said, whenever it's ready. What is going to be the title? Whatever you made it to be. And I sort of kind of be like, well, I sort of forgotten that. But at this time, I sat down and I wrote down the outline of this book. After being in the United States for almost 4 years, when I came to the United States in 1999, I went straight to seminary for my Master of Divinity. I had just done a Bachelor of Theology in the Cameroon. And I came here and said, well, I'm a pastor. If I'm going to pastor well or to know how Christianity works in America, I should go to school. I actually went to seminary in Louisville, Kentucky, January of 2000. And my experience of the land and of the Christians and the people of the land were not very positive, if at all. And I remember distinctly, I mean, it was me, not that it's something somebody told me, March of 2000, I was so frustrated by the way I saw my professors in seminary applying the Bible that I was so frustrated that I had to come to a certain decision in my life to actually continue in seminary. And it was a very rational decision. I said to myself, I would have burnt the Bible. Now, pay attention. I would have burnt the Bible if the Bible was written by Westerners, or who you call the white people. If it was written by, I would have burnt it and exited out of the seminary. Because the way that the West applies the Bible, it looks like they're applying the Bible, but it's something else. I sat in class and I was like, am I reading the same book? Or what is going on here? Now, before I came to the States, I had been reading books written by Christian from America, especially evangelicals, because in Cameroon, I would describe myself as an evangelical. An evangelical just means Bible believing. So when I went to seminary, which was a Bible believing seminary, I was like, man, you're just teaching something else. Besides that, the attitude of looking down on you as a black person, and all the more so from Africa, was like, oh, really? It felt like you will never be a true brother to a Western Christian because you are always down there. I saw the paternalism in the action and in speech, and it looked like whatever you know will never be accepted because you come from that place and you are that kind of a person. And I saw the attitude of it like nobody can actually change people like this from thinking otherwise, which is why, and I think I wrote that down in towards the end of my book. I said to myself, where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise, which means it is useless educating people who are happy to remain in their state of ignorance. Ignorance, especially spiritual ignorance, especially biblical ignorance, is abysmal in this America. Believe it or not, it's Christian America. The Bible is everywhere. There's seminaries everywhere. But the Bible, no. So I had this experience, but I remained in seminary. And then something happened. I don't know whether it was 2000, 2001, or 2002. But within those years, something happened. There was an election in Kentucky. They call it gubernatorial election. Well, the election of a governor in Kentucky. I remember, I think the governor was a Democratic governor. His name was Paul Patton or something like that. And then his fellow contestant, the Republican, I think his name was Fletcher or something. So it happened that the Republican contender won the election. And I was taking a class in systematic theology. And it was not my professor that came to class the following day or the following week after the election. It was his graduate assistant. He came to class and spoke. And by implication, it sounded like heaven just had a victory over hell or something like that. And I was very puzzled. Like the divide between the left and the right in America, or between the Democrats and the Republicans, it was so sharp that I had this conflict in me. Like, okay, I am supposed to call myself, I'm a believer, I'm an evangelical, Bible believing, and I'm in an evangelical school, and it looks like, oh, the Democrats are the devils. So I had to redefine listen carefully, I had to redefine the word evangelical, because at that moment I realized that the word evangelical was almost synonymous with Republican. And I was like, how come can this be? So that's where the conflict tightened in me, and I began to look at things like what's going on here. And during that time also, I had come in contact with all this teaching about America is a Christian nation. America was founded like a Christian nation. And I was like, how so? So I began to dig, to read, even though I was studying at seminary, I began to dig and read and so on. And remember that during that time, it was George W. Bush that was president. And when I just arrived the US, like it was like within 2 months, he had made a statement somewhere that his political philosophy comes from Jesus Christ. And I perked up and my antenna were up like, whoa, a politician whose philosophy comes from Jesus, this is wonderful. Well, I was soon very disappointed. And then I began to be like, oh, if you're in America, you hear the word evangelical, be careful. It does not just mean Bible believing. It also means Republican. And doesn't mean that Republicans are perfect and holy and so on. That was not the case. In fact, I had made up my mind and said, okay, fine. If the Republicans are that good and holy, if I were to join a political party, then I would join the Sinners Party, which is the Democratic Party. No, I didn't join. It's not like the Democrats do things right. If I will get to it in my book, I came to the conclusion, which somebody had come, that the Democrats are what we call disorganized evil. You can do your own thing. You can be Christian, you can be atheist, you can be whatever. But then the Republicans are like the holy people, the right people, everything. And it was a little scary, or still is, that I came to the point where I was like, if somebody were to ask me who was a Pharisee in the Bible, I would just say evangelical. If you want to understand the Pharisees, try and understand evangelicals and their quest for political power. So all these things were reflecting in me. And that is what pushed me to begin to write this book. That's what led me to the outline of this book. One more thing that also contributed to the writing of this book was the doctrine of what we call the rapture, or what some Christians call the rapture. Ever since I was called by the Father in 1992, when I listen to people talk about the rapture, it looks exciting. Or read a book about the rapture, it looks exciting. But then I would turn to the Bible to see where is the rapture taught, and I will not see it there. Even the verses that people use to justify the rapture, that is, Jesus will come secretly for believers, take them away, and then come back with them after 7 years. Jesus did not teach that. Paul did not teach that. The Bible does not teach that. But why do we teach it? So I was wrestling with that too, and I was about to write something on it until I found a book that somebody had written on the subject. I'm like, there's no point writing another book if somebody has actually written about this subject, calling it end time delusions. End time delusions. All the things surrounding the rapture is a delusion. So I was not going to dwell on that. So I didn't dwell much on that in my book, except mentioning it in passing. So I hope I'm not rambling, but I'm trying to help you understand what led me to write this book, from which I'm going to write about the danger of uniting church and state. I have already mentioned the fact that this did not start today. It started way back in the 3rd century when Constantine founded the Christian religion. I just call it that way. In fact, in this book, I've called Christianity Constantianity. Because if you examine Christianity carefully, according to the Bible, you realize that there are two different systems. There are two different systems. There are people who can say, I'm a Christian, but they have nothing to do with the Bible. Or they say, I have something to do with the Bible, but the practical application of the Bible is non-existent. Let me say, for instance, in the law and throughout the prophets, there are 4 classes of people who constitute the poor that God says, take care of them. And that if these 4 kinds of people, if they are going to cry because they are being oppressed, God, I will rise up, and whoever is oppressing them, I'm going to destroy him. They were the orphan, the widow, and the alien, or stranger, or migrant. He didn't have land, no family, so he had nothing to depend on. So these 3 people constituted the poor. And I've made a statement, I'm making it again, that if you remove the orphan, the widow, the alien, who constitute the poor from the Bible, or the oppressed from the Bible, if you remove them from the Bible, you may remove up to 75% of the Bible. So if a religion and a country does not care for the orphan, the widow, the alien, and mistreats these people, that country can never claim to know God or to know the Bible. So it is a contradiction that a nation that calls itself a Christian nation will mistreat aliens and the poor the way that America treats these people. And right now, as I'm speaking, you know the invasion of DC, and subsequently, where else are they going to go? I could say a lot about that, but what I'm trying to say to you here is that what I wrote down and what I'm going to read to you is not because of Trump. It is a system that has been in place, that was practiced throughout medieval Europe, and that up to this moment, Catholicism still practices that because it is a state. It's also a state that governs itself. So let's begin. Before I begin, the Creator, the Savior of Israel, has always wanted to be the king and ruler of his people. Didn't want to have people to rule over others, because we as humans, we like to control other people. Yes, he delivered them out of Egypt through the hand of Moses, but he was their king, their direct ruler. And when Moses died and he came into the promised land, they had judges that intermittently ruled over them. And there was one of them that the people of Israel wanted to make king. He said, no, I can be your king. God can be your king. Only God will be your king only. Now listen carefully to what I'm saying and what it's leading to. Because a king, like in Deuteronomy, Moses had warned, a king will take your children to fight in his army. He will take your children to work his farms, and he will literally rule over you. That's what rulers do. The Israelites were like, well, that's how the other nations are. We want to be like them. We want to be a democracy too. We want to have a president to rule over us. Now, this is just a background and what I reflected on before I started writing this book. And there's already a few more chapters introducing the subject of prophecy. What is prophecy? Prophecy is to foretell an event, which is like a warning, telling the people, repent, or judgment is going to come, or that's foretelling, or foretelling, that is talking about something that will happen in the distant future. And much of that has to do with the coming of Jesus in his first and second advent, and then the day of judgment, and the rule of Christ in a physical form upon this earth. So that's the introduction to this book. Then this title here, which is chapter 3, is Israel's Blunder. Israel's Blunder. After Adam and Eve's rebellion, man was left on his own to seek God. In Genesis 6, we see Noah as a man who was blameless and found grace before God. God revealed himself to Noah, but there was no written revelation yet. Even in God's dealing with Abraham and his immediate progeny, there was no written revelation. Beginning with Moses, God was to be the direct ruler of his people, Israel. Through those, he would choose and put his spirit in them. Okay? I will read that again. Beginning with Moses, God was to be the direct ruler of his people, Israel. Through those, he would choose. Who would choose them? God, not vote. Who would choose them? God, not vote. He would choose them and put his spirit in them. Joshua followed Moses. Then God raised up rulers, we call them judges, to lead Israel. The priests, who are Levites, were to handle matters related to worship. Now, that is important. Pay attention to that. We want to examine the fact that why is uniting church and state anathema? Why is uniting church and state accursed? Why is what the evangelicals and Trump, or MAGA and Trump doing anathema? Why is it antichrist? These are the foundations, okay? And I am applying this to the current state of affairs, but I wrote this 20 years ago, trying to delineate something that had already seeped into God's people. Israel brought it in amongst them, and then Satan invaded the movement that Jesus founded in the 3rd century and brought in this union of church and state. Before we get there, get this clear. Wherever you see the church and the state united, the devil is 100% in control. By implication, before we get there, the MAGA nonsense that is going on in America, and beyond MAGA, just the evangelical political alliance, and it began long time before Trump. That alliance is antichrist, it is anathema, it is damned, it is condemned. And I will not change my words. So here, God was to choose who to lead his people, and then to put his spirit in whom he chose to lead his people. And then there was the Levitical line that was to coordinate and lead worship. What was Israel's blunder? They asked for a king. The Israelites were not satisfied with God's leadership through the judges and the priests. They looked at the leadership style of their pagan neighbors, Gentile neighbors, and wanted to imitate them. They started to ask for a king by requesting the judge Gideon to be their king, but he refused. Gideon said the following. Okay, it's reported. The Israelites said to Gideon, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us out of the hand of the Midian." But Gideon told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." He knew the plan of God. Who will rule over them? The Lord will rule over you. Again, in the days of Samuel, the judge and prophet, pay attention to those titles. Samson was a judge and he was also a prophet. And he grew up in the temple with the priest Eli, which means he had some priestly duties as well. He was a prefiguring of Christ, who is going to be prophet, priest, and king. Samuel was. Again, in the days of Samuel, the judge and prophet, the Israelites rejected the Lord's leadership. They rejected Yah's leadership. Listen very carefully. We are talking about how dangerous it is to unite political and spiritual power together, like the evangelicals have done, especially MAGA evangelicals with Trump. It's a rejection of the rule of God. The Israelites rejected the Lord's leadership and requested for a king to rule over them, as was the case with other pagan nations. Note that very carefully. So, this is what is written. So all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as the other nations have." 1 Samuel chapter 8, 4-5. And then I write a rhetorical question, sort of exclamation thing here. How the people of God always want to go the way of the world, even today. Jesus warned his disciples against the Gentile system. Remember that very well. If you know Jesus, or if you want to know him, or you want to understand what is going on. And the Lord, okay, this made Samuel very angry. When they say we want a king, this made Samuel very angry. And he prayed to the Lord. And the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king." In the days of Jesus, they would say, "We have no king but Caesar. We have no king but Trump." Just so you can begin to think. The Lord, through Samuel, warned the Israelites of the disadvantages of asking for a king, but they insisted to have a king anyway. It is written, but the people refused to listen to Samuel. No, they said, "We want a king over us. Then we will be like all the other nations, with a king to lead us and to go out before us and fight our battles." Well, the Father, Yah, was fighting their battles. And then all of a sudden, they think that the Democratic Party will fight their battle. They think that the Republican Party will fight their battle. They think that the MAGA will fight their battle. Just so you can begin to think where we're going with this. I say here, thus the people rejected God's kingship and preferred human kingship, though the Lord had up to then fought their battles for them. The Israelites, or the Jews, would again cry out before Jesus' crucifixion, "We have no king but Caesar." God's people living in disobedience are always prone to go with human viewpoint rather than divine viewpoint. They prefer the way of the world, which is Satan's way, and paganism to God's way. And I don't want this to be long, so next we're going to look at the choice of Saul as king and how Saul disobeyed. I could just mention that and go ahead, but I want you to actually understand why Saul was rejected. I want you to understand it very carefully, why he was rejected. And we're going to look at that next time. And before I round it up, I have to read that statement to you again. So the people said to Samuel, "We want a king." God condescended, said, "Okay, give them a king." And then Jesus comes as the king of the Israelites. They say, "We have no king but Caesar." And then I say this here, God's people living in disobedience are always prone to go with human viewpoint rather than God's viewpoint. They prefer the way of the world and the paganism to God's way. Why is it so dangerous uniting church and state? Or why is uniting church and state accursed, damned, or anathema? See you in the next presentation.